Rallying in the 80s is the story of how a sport evolved through the first decade of a fledgling world championship, and also how cars and manufacturers changed as well. For example, the Ford Escort becoming the powerful Group B RS200. The Fiat Abarth in champion form as the decade began. The Lancia Delta, the champion car, as it ended. From the same stable, the Talbot Sunbeam Lotus, the Group B Peugeot 205. It was a decade that saw the four-wheel drive revolution, and it was a decade that saw familiar rally cars turn into the Group B monsters in the never-ending quest for power, speed and performance. But by the end of the 80s, familiar shapes had returned, and the emphasis was still on superb engineering and as much as ever on the craft, skill and courage of the men behind the wheel. Rallying, and the World Championship in particular, is the supreme test of technology and driving talent, taking place as it does on such a wide range of surfaces and in so many different climates. From snow and ice to high-speed tarmac, gravel stages that shred the tyres, and Britain's forest tracks on the RAC Rally. This is where it was all played out, and few sports have changed as much as rallying did in the 80s. And this is where the action began, the 1980 Monte Carlo Rally, starting off the second year of the new World Rally Championship. Fiat and team boss Daniel Ordetto were looking confident, even though the 131 Abarth appeared to be near the end of its competitive life. However, in Walter Röhrl, the former European champion, they had a driver of undoubted world class. In previous seasons with the car, he'd helped Fiat to 2 manufacturers' titles, and in a limited season in 1979, he'd done enough to earn himself 9th place in the World Championship, helped in no small degree by a 2nd place on the San Remo. Alongside Röhrl for Fiat was Björn Waldegard, the man who the previous season had become the first ever world champion. And this is the champion style in the works Ford Escort RS. But for 1980, Ford had retired from rallying to concentrate on developing a new car. The world champion didn't seem too downcast at the switch from Ford to Fiat.
I'm in a quite good team actually, with a lot of experience, and we have done a lot of practice. So I feel confident.
We try to do our best. We know that Stratos and Porsche are favorite. They start with the favors, but we try our best.
Porsche had a very relevant presence in the sport through previous seasons and had proved especially effective on the Monte Carlo. But not in 1980, as Hannu Mikkola, World Championship runner-up in the previous season, but now another refugee from Ford, went out of the Monte Carlo as the 911 suffered drive shaft failure.
Can I have a look at the tire?
So the contest came down to Lancia against Fiat, and Bernard Darniche in the Stratus had to settle for 2nd, as Walter Röhrl and Christian Geisdorfer took the victory in what was no longer rumoured to be an outdated car. A victory for Röhrl that laid the foundation for a World Championship winning season. For Fiat, a season that would end with them as champion manufacturers. Datsun were runners-up in the championship with the 160J. In seasons to come, there'd be the Datsun Violet, in which top drivers like Timo Salonen would come to prominence. But new cars for the season, well, 1980 saw a big budget attempt at the championship by Mercedes, but the very heavy 450 SL never really fulfilled the hopes, especially on the endurance events, where it was expected to do well. The car was also involved in this incident that suggested that spectator safety was going to be a big issue in the 80s. Fortunately, there were no serious injuries here. There was a very effective and very potent challenge from Opel, the team masterminded by Tony Fall, and the Ascona 400 promised much for the seasons to come, but delivered victory as early as the Swedish Rally in 1980, the car in the expert hands of Anders Kulang. But the Manufacturers' Championship in 1980 saw Fiat from Datsun, and Ford were third, despite the withdrawal of the works team. It was the efforts of privateers like London-based David Sutton who kept the Escort RS at the forefront. And Sutton had a great driver in Ari Vatanen. He'd come fifth in the 1979 World Championship and was clearly destined for great things. But in the previous seasons, Vatanen, the former steamroller driver from Tupovara in Finland, had been given his first big break by Stuart Turner at Ford and rewarded him with British Championship success. In 1980, he paid back David Sutton in the same way, a British Championship based on consistent results.
He's had 8 second places, and we think that it's reliability and consistency that win championships. So we're very satisfied with his results indeed.
In fact, this has got to be one of your best ever seasons.
It's the best year we've ever had in the history of the company, yes.
And with the help of Vatanen, they'd improve on it very soon, especially with Vatanen apparently trying to reform from the flat-out, risk-everything style of his youth. Also helping to make David Sutton's team one of the most impressive organisations in the sport was the arrival of Hannu Mikkola, who was having a vagabond kind of 1980 season, switching between teams like Porsche, Mercedes, Toyota and Ford. But the sight of Mikkola and Vatanen flat out in the British forests was a compelling one, and Vatanen and Sutton were clearly forming a productive partnership.
He's very fussy about the position of his seat because he's very tall and very slim. He's very fussy about the position of the pedals because he's got long legs. And he's very particular about the position of his steering wheel because on some steering wheels his legs in fact do come up behind the steering wheel.
The other leading ally in the Vatanen effort was in the co-driver's seat, Dave Richards. As the 80s progressed, he'd become a significant team manager in his own right. But on the 1980 Manx Rally, he was reading the pace notes.
70, flat right, 50, flat left. The numbers are all the distances, or approximate distances in meters. And then everything else is a basic description on left and right, a variable on left and right. So you've got sort of from minus left and hairpin left, which are the very tight corners, right the way through the scale to absolute left, which is absolutely flat out as it sounds. Absolute left, 150, flat left of a brow, 50 brow, 250, double caution, narrow medium left.
When you have a professional co-driver, he's not on your way of winning. But if you have a bad co-driver, he can make mistakes and jeopardize good drivers' chances.
And this is the kind of mistake that's always going to be the co-driver's fault. Ari Vatanen with Dave Richards, British champions 1980, and a lot of people's choice for the world title in 1981. Hannu Mikkola, winner of 4 World Championship rallies in 1979, was also on the verge of a breakthrough that went by the name of the Audi Quattro. But in 1980, he was finding the champagne a little hard to come by.
And it's not the first time Hannu's done this. I mean, he doesn't know what to do with bottles of champagne. There we go. No!
But at the end of 1980, another young Finn was making an impression. Talbot arrived at the Lombard RAC rally as outsiders, but with Henri Toivonen at the wheel, they emerged as winners. Toivonen was still with Talbot as the Monte Carlo rally signalled the start of the 1981 season. Toivonen wouldn't upset the form book this time, though. Instead, a popular victory was claimed by a Frenchman at the wheel of a French car. A first World Championship success for Jean Ragnotti in the Renault 5 Turbo. But perhaps the 1981 Monte Carlo will be best remembered for the arrival of the name Quattro. The four-wheel drive revolution had begun, ushered in with 8 fastest times by Hannu Mikkola, after which he was quick to give a verdict.
Every car is different to drive, and this one, I think it suits quite well my driving style, because I haven't been a driver who's driving very much sideways, and this car you are not allowed to drive so much sideways. It goes fastest when it's on straight line.
After that blistering start, Mikkola made a mistake and went off the road out of the rally, but the sport had been served notice that things were never going to be the same. If maximum traction was a factor, then the Quattro would be the car to beat, and that meant it was tailor-made for its second World Championship outing on the Swedish rally. And Hannu Mikkola delivered an overwhelming victory that signalled to the other teams that future rear-wheel drive plans would have to be revised. But maybe the revolution wasn't that total, because the car, a heavy and complex machine, was not suited to the tarmac quite so much, and there followed a string of indifferent, if not disastrous, results. In Portugal, Mikkola's car blew an engine after leading at half distance. In Corsica, both Mikkola and teammate Michel Mouton blew engines, and the 3 team cars were disqualified in Greece after technical infringements. It was small wonder that Mikkola was looking frustrated, because this was the perfect opportunity for four-wheel drive to make an impression on the world scene, with Ford and Fiat, the big names of the late 70s, having withdrawn from competition for the time being. But after the mid-season despondency, the championship would end with four-wheel drive once again underlining its sporting potential. After the Thousand Lakes, victory would come at San Remo, and it was a very important success, because while the Swedish victory might have been written off as a special car for special conditions, there was no doubting the domination in the heat and dust of North Italy. It was Mikkola who set most of the fastest times, but Michel Mouton's consistent performance gave her the first ever win by a lady driver in a World Championship rally. And more was to come, as Mikkola won the RAC rally, with Mouton coming close to making it an Audi 1-2. But Audi didn't feature in the World Championship honours in 1981. Instead, it was Ari Vatanen who fulfilled all the promise of previous seasons to win in Greece, Brazil and Finland to claim his first World Drivers' Championship. It was Talbot who claimed the manufacturer's title, helped by the flamboyant style of Henri Toivonen and the more considered approach of Guy Freckelin. Talbot Datsun Ford was the manufacturer's order, but Vatanen and Toivonen, in drivers' terms, were the exciting future of rallying. But for Ford and Talbot, this was the last flourish of the old-style rally cars. The supercars and Group B were not far away. The sport was attracting worldwide exposure, and new horizons were opening up. The Safari Rally produced a final flourish for Datsun. But elsewhere, the cameras were being trained on the future, and that meant the new technological opportunities being opened up by four-wheel drive. The breakthrough hadn't been easy for Audi, and there were early pressures and tensions within what had to be a very sophisticated team. Roland Gumpert was brought in to mastermind the operation, but a key personality was always going to be its star driver. Hannu Mikkola had signed his exclusive Audi contract in November 1980, and his input into the development of the car was crucial.
First I complain, and then they think in the factory, you know, using all the resources, how they can make the car better. And when they have made it, then they ask me to drive, and I tell them if I like it or not. That's the way how it works. When you are doing this decision, you know, of course it's quite a big responsibility to feel that it's going the right direction. We are part of the development work, so we are getting all the help from the factory, what they can give, and this kind of factory can give really lot knowledge and lot of engineers and thinking, so it's we are getting a lot of benefit out of it. I think they are getting quite a lot of benefit out of it, because they can also test the new ideas on our car.
The other great success of Audi's first year of World Championship competition was Michel Mouton, brought from relative obscurity to forge a happy partnership with Mikkola.
To be with Hannu is fantastic for me because first he's a gentleman and second he drives fantastic and I learn very much with him. More in technical point of view and he's really discreet, he's calm. He's every time open, you know, you can go to him and to speak. It's really, I am very pleased to be with him. For a woman, the problem is, I think, to reach the top, the problem is to fight against yourself. Because a woman is more sensitive. And this, at the top, you have to forget. So you have to fight to say, no, not saying that you are too quick. You have to go more and more. And this is a man mentality. And sometimes I have the feeling that I get this man mentality.
At the beginning of her driving with Quattro, I was trying to teach her what I knew about the car and how to drive it, so she was sitting with me and I was showing it. Suddenly I noticed that she can do it.
La troisième et la seconde? Oui. La quatrième est parfaite, là. La première, bon, ça va. Mais la seconde, il faut trop forcer pour venir, et la troisième, elle rentre pas bien.
For 1982, the partnership was joined by Stig Blomqvist, who campaigned at Quattro in the Swedish National Championship. And he promptly won the Swedish Rally, but only after Mouton and Mikkola had collided in a snowbank when an Audi 123 looked likely. Consolation for Michel Mouton came with victory in Portugal, fending off the challenge of Walter Röhrl, who was leading the Drivers' Championship after his victory on the Monte Carlo. And on the Acropolis Rally, it was Mouton beating the Opel of Röhrl once again. Yet another celebration for the French driver with co-driver Fabrizio Pons, and more was to follow for Audi, with Mikkola winning the Thousand Lakes. Following that came success for Stig Blomqvist on the San Remo, Stig responding in spirited fashion after having to obey team orders and follow Mikkola home in Finland. It was all helping to close the gap on Opel in the Manufacturers' Championship. And for Opel, falling off the start ramp in Sweden was not a great way for Walter Röhrl to follow up his Monte Carlo victory. Röhrl was driving the Swedish Rally for the first time, and in following Blomqvist and Vatanen home in third place, he'd given team boss Tony Fall an insight into the enigmatic style of the former world champion.
Walter was using a great deal of understeer. From my days, I remember that if you were in that attitude, if the corner tightened, it put you in a very difficult spot to actually get the car around it. It's the first time I've had a chance to watch Walter's style, and although it's very fast, you must be very brave to be able to do that all the way. It creates some exceptionally good times, and the car stays very stable. You must have intensively quick reactions to be able to switch the car from an understeering situation into an oversteering situation in the middle of a corner.
Röhrl's consistency throughout the season took him to his second world title. By the time he'd clinched things on the Ivory Coast, he'd signed a 1983 contract with Lancia, and so was a last-minute absentee from the RAC.
Where's Walter?
I should think he's on his way back to Germany now.
And what's the reason for that?
I don't think he really had his heart in this event, and we felt it better that it would be somebody that was a bit more hungry, could give us a better result.
So you just made the decision to sack Walter Röhrl this morning before starting the rally?
Sacking, we just suggested it might be better for everybody concerned if he went back.
I just get 1 hour before the information from my chief that I'm free, I can go home, and I think what's maybe also sure, if you are already a world champion, you are not motivated like you fight for a world champion, and my team is afraid that maybe I am not enough motivated and it's better to send me home, and of course I respect it and I'm very happy about this one.
It had been a frustrating year for Hannu Mikkola, but a dominant win on the RAC was consolation, and at the last round Audi were able to take the manufacturer's title from Opel, but once again the story was moving on, and it moved on in the shape of Group B, the new category that allowed manufacturers to design purpose-built rally cars with only 200 road-legal versions needing to be produced. The Lancia Rally was one of the first genuine examples, and in 1983 it would be driven by Walter Röhrl.
Attack, and I have done it last year and I will do it this year. And after this race I will see how it's working, but for the first one anyway you have to go flat out.
Alongside the world champion, Marco Allen, who had driven the car first in World Championship action in Corsica in 1982, and he'd taken it to 4th place in that year's RAC Rally. But this promised to be a battle royal between Lancia and Audi, two manufacturers totally committed to the sport and victory in the sport. And the opening round on the snow-free Monte Carlo rally belonged emphatically to Lancia and to Walter Röhrl, driving, as he promised, flat out. The world champion was in devastating form. Marco Alén, with his greater experience of the car, was almost 5 minutes behind, but still completing a Lancia 1-2. The best for Audi and the A1 Quattro was Stig Blomqvist on his first Monte Carlo, third place ahead of Hannu Mikkola, and no team orders. On to Sweden for what was now the only genuine winter rally. No Lancias and an event tailor-made for Audi. And after the embarrassment of the previous year, no mistakes from Hannu Mikkola, no mistakes from Michel Mouton. Remember, they collided 12 months earlier. Mouton was fourth, but victory for Mikkola, ahead of Blomqvist, who was debuting the Group A Audi A-Team. Portugal was always going to be a tougher prospect. Audi against Lancia once again. And Audi 1-2, Mikkola from Mouton, with Röhrl in third. And this was the modern breed of rally cars at their very best. By the time the championship reached the sunny shores of Corsica, things were looking good for Mikkola and Audi. Mikkola's second place on the Safari behind Vatanen gave him a 28-point lead in the championship. Mouton second, Vatanen third. Audi was 16 points ahead of Lancia in the Constructors' Championship, Lancia third behind Opel. For Corsica, Audi had the new Evolution A2 Quattro, which represented a significant weight saving. They tested diligently, though a Lancia success appeared inevitable. For Mikkola, it would be a troubled rally. He'd make a valiant attempt to match the Lancias, but it would all end with a broken rear suspension. A whole catalogue of problems for Michel Mouton led to her retirement. The strain of a rather uneven contest shows for Michel, who left it to Fabrizio Pons to sum up the latest crisis.
It was not exactly one dangerous corner or nothing particular, but the car was understeer and we went out.
Corsica was Lancia's finest hour. A year after its World Championship debut, the Lancia rally took the first 4 places, Alén winning from Röhrl. In Greece, it was Röhrl from Alén. Röhrl led the World Championship. In Finland, Mikkola has hit problems.
The engine took fire and it has been problems since, and now we are changing this, what they call gallery. Let's hope they have time to change.
Mikkola wearing the weary expression of a man who's already battled back to lead from 143rd position after an earlier transmission failure. But this is another setback, and from out on the stage, news of another fire for Michel Mouton.
Can you still drive, Michel? Yes. Drive it into lake or somewhere, it will, you know, you can't do anything else.
If I start and if it's turning again, I cannot stop the fire.
Aha, you are stopped and the fire is stopped.
Yes, sure, it was burning like hell. 3 kilometers after the start.
Uh-huh.
Mikkola offers advice, but really he's in enough trouble himself, and it's about to get considerably worse when they try to start his car.
Joking and said, try to go to the lake, you know, but, you know. First, I didn't know where was the lake, and secondly, I think I'd prefer to stop the car than to swim.
What is this?
Kind.
Okay. But why it's like this?
Mikkola sees that the fuel pressure is dropping and time is running out.
It's going down, you know. But nu är det shit, vet du. Igen. Det är ingenting att...
Switchen är on, väl?
Ja, de är on. No, out!
Out.
What is it now? Standing. How long time? 5 minutes. How minutes?
We are not out of time yet, but it's a long way to go.
I don't know how you can smile. I don't know if I cry or smile.
Mikkola rode the problems, was fastest on 29 of the rally's 50 stages to produce one of his most famous victories and reclaim the World Championship lead. For Mikkola on the San Remo, there came another engine fire, and this one was rather more terminal.
Oh, we just tried to put it out, but it was too late, so whole car burned.
And Audi also got burned by Lancia, who claimed 4 of the first 5 places to give Lancia the constructors' title. The drivers' title still lay between Alain and Roll for Lancia and Mikkola for Audi.
Our target is to win the championship, not to fight the 2 drivers of our team together. Eh? Okay, so they will go, I think, in the position they have now.
That was how Lancia boss Cesare Fiorio announced that his men wouldn't be going to the RAC to contest the driver's title. Enough lira had been spent chasing the Audis already. They may well have caught one on the opening stage. Arne Hertz giving valuable support to the rear suspension of Mikkola. Mikkola followed Blomqvist home and was world champion. But then Walter Röhrl made the decision to switch from Lancia to Audi, an intriguing combination for the 1984 season.
Until last year, in my opinion, I was thinking maybe it's possible to win with a 2-wheel driven car. But in last year, I saw and I learned that it's no way to win without 4-wheel drive. If we remember my winnings in Acropolis in New Zealand, it was just luck. It was no way normally to beat the Audis, and they have been unlucky. That was the reason, and we should not forget it. This morning, first time I was left foot braking, I always said I can't believe that it's necessary to make left foot braking, but now I understand it's really necessary, otherwise it doesn't turn. And of course, if you are only 15 years have used the left foot for the clutch, you have not so really sensitive feeling for braking. And that's the reason which I have to learn.
Röhrl plus Mikkola plus 4-wheel drive. Lancia knew that the odds were stacked against them as they entered the 1984 season with the powerful but 2-wheel drive Lancia Rally. However, there was an optimistic feel about their pre-season get-together in the snow. Alain would be supported by Jean-Claude Androuet and Attilio Bettiger. And as the trio put on their own Audi-style ice show, Alain pointed out the advances that had been made in the close season.
Last year I have in 2-liter engine, now I have 2.1, and I have in 20-25 horsepower more, big compressor, and also I have in differential more longer. I have an average now 185 kilometers per hour, and last year I have only 164. And also I have in 20 kilo less in car, and much good power. You know, I have a good torque, and also up I have a good engine. And I am very happy with my engine.
It was going to be a snowy Monte Carlo to start the season, certainly favouring Audi, and also surely a great help to their Scandinavians Stig Blomqvist and Hannu Mikkola. Audi did score a 1-2, took all the major honours on the event, but but it was Walter Röhrl who upset the predictions by claiming victory while still struggling to get used to four-wheel drive. The best Lanciers were 5th and 6th. Audi had at last won the Monte Carlo, and with a German behind the wheel who was proving himself to be the best driver in the sport. On the Swedish rally, Stig Blomqvist carried number 1 and finished number 1, heading another Audi 1-2-3 with Michel Mouton 2nd, Per Eklund 3rd. Stig's 7th victory on his home event. On to Portugal, victory for Hannu Mikkola. Marco Alen took 2nd in the Lancia, but it was a dismal season for Lancia and no one seemed capable of challenging the domination of Audi. That was until Corsica, when Ari Vatanen donned the colours of Peugeot to take the wheel of their new Group B challenger, the 205 Turbo 16, of which not a great deal was expected.
Honestly, I don't think our cars should finish, because they are new, but I hope that before the cars start to have problems, they show how competitive they are.
I must admire our team for getting everything ready. They have worked under extreme pressure the last few months. They have worked literally day and night to get cars ready and to get cars homologated, and I'm very happy to be here. We are here to get more experience, and you know, regardless of our result on this one, we just try to do our best.
And Ari's best was quite sensational. The previous season it seemed that the immensely talented Vatanen had gone off the boil, but the four-wheel drive supercar seemed to spark new life into the Finn. After 8 stages, Vatanen was ahead. At one point his teammate Jean-Pierre Nicolas was 2nd. It mattered not that eventually Vatanen would crash 80 feet down a bank in a violent accident. A new chapter of Group B rallying was being written. 350 horsepower, the Peugeot 205 Turbo 16 would be a World Championship winner before long. Making a less spectacular debut in Corsica, Audi's latest progression, the 20-valve shortened Quattro Sport, but even in the hands of Walter Röhrl, it was cumbersome, off the pace, and retired on stage 8. Despite Peugeot capturing the headlines, it was Lancia's rally. Mickey Biasion marked himself down as a driver to watch by taking 2nd place behind his teammate Marco Alen. But it was to be the Italians' only success of the season. Stig Blomqvist added wins in Greece, New Zealand, Argentina and the Ivory Coast to his victory in Sweden, and he was crowned world champion with the highest total of wins in one season. Audi took the manufacturer's title, but Peugeot dominated the latter part of the season, Vatanen winning the Thousand Lakes, the San Remo and the RAC in a style that suggested the golden years were over for Audi. Waiting in the wings also for 85 was Lancia's new four-wheel drive challenger, but at the end of 84, Peugeot were the class of the field. Another Group B car making an impression during 1984, the Toyota Celica Turbo, and emergent Juha Kankkunen took it to 5th place on the Thousand Lakes. Per Eklund got a top 3 place on the RAC, but the highlight for Toyota was the victory for Bjorn Valdegaard in their first attempt on the Safari Rally. Valdegaard fought off the challenge of Lancia and Audi to win the fastest ever East African event with the Opel Manta of Rauno Aaltonen 2nd. An Opel who had moved from the Ascona to the Group B Manta 400 was strong on presentation but short on results, at least as far as the World Championship was concerned. But its development was in safe hands, campaigned as it had been by Henri Toivonen and Ari Vatanen through 1983, albeit with only modest success. But the Manta in full flight was one of the most stirring sights on the World Championship scene, and in 1984 was among the most thrilling spectacles on the British Championship scene, where Jimmy McRae and Russell Brooks fought out a personal duel, fending off the occasional visits of Hannu Mikkola and Walter Röhrl. This is Russell Brooks, fully committed on the Manx Rally, but the RAC was the highlight for him and for Opel. Brooks took 5th on the World Championship round, Jimmy McRae 7th and Bertie Fisher 9th. Also on the World Championship scene were Nissan with the sometimes unwieldy 240 RS, campaigned valiantly for 2 years by Timo Salonen. In 1984, Salonen produced a string of top 10 finishes, including 7th on the Safari, 6th in Greece and 4th in New Zealand. The year finished with Salonen taking 6th place on the RAC to finish 9th equal in the World Championship. But for 85, Salonen would be off to Peugeot, where his undoubted talents would receive real reward. Others to campaign the Nissan with less success than Salonen included Shekhar Mehta and one of Britain's most popular rallying personalities, Tony Pond. Pond had been a presence on world events since the mid-70s. 1983 in Corsica, he was overcoming the odd problem to bring the Nissan home in 7th. At the end of the 1984 season, Pond could be seen campaigning a Rover Vitesse in the British Championship, his flamboyant style very much in evidence. It was the start of what looked like a very productive relationship with Austin Rover, with Pond set to campaign the manufacturer's new Group B car in the seasons to come. Before all that, though, Pond had to overcome this moment of embarrassment on the opening stage of the 1984 RAC.
Let's get out and have a look.
The number plate summed up the mood, and it was an incident that took Pond and his co-driver Rob Arthur quite some time to live down, coming as it did on a rather innocuous spectator stage prior to the serious action. You can see the force of the impact from the driver's helmet there, but the car took the worst of it. Pond was out of the event, and Group A for him was almost over. Group B was beckoning. Group B for Pond came in the form of the MG Metro 6R4, ARG's new Group B car that Pond had been testing and running in some of the national rallies in 1984.
The traction and the stopping power of the car is unbelievable, and even the handling in the corners is not unlike a conventional car once you get it set up. Everybody's got the traction, and everybody's got relatively good brakes with four-wheel drive, but I think we're better in the braking department, and we're certainly much better in the handling department.
It all represented a major effort by Austin Rover, and with Ford also developing the RS200, Britain were apparently going to be well represented in the new age of World Championship rallying. The 6R4, four-wheel drive, non-turbocharged, with that distinctive wing set well clear of the bodywork, Austin Rover would soon have completed the 200 units required for homologation into Group B. And they anticipated by the end of the 1985 season, they'd be ready to take their place in a very high-powered competition. Also waiting in the wings, four-wheel drive for Lancia, the new Delta S4 to replace the aging, outclassed Lancia Rally. The last few weeks of the 1985 season promised much. But in the meantime, the task was to vainly try and halt the progress of the Peugeot 205 Turbo 16. As it turned out, an understrength Lancia could barely get Mickey Biasion into the top 10, although Walter Röhrl took third in the Audi Sport Quattro ahead of Salonen, but behind the all-conquering Vatanen. There was a more worrying factor. The crowds were bigger and more unruly than ever, lured by the dramatic performance of this new breed of car. Vatanen was having to try exceptionally hard after incurring an 8-minute penalty for checking into a time control early. He went off into the packed crowd here. No serious injuries, and Vatanen continued his spectacular fight back to victory, but there were increasing concerns for the safety of spectators and crews. Vatanen won in Sweden and then retired in Portugal, where Salonen claimed his first victory. But here in Corsica, Lancia was certainly under pressure to produce something. They were still rated as the fastest on asphalt. But this would be a last sad view of Attilio Bettiger. On one of the opening stages, he went off on a fast right-hander and was killed instantly. Bettiger had been seriously injured in a crash on Corsica in 1982. But now the 32-year-old, one of the true gentlemen of the sport, was dead.
A great tragedy and a great driver. He was less of the superstar type, which I liked actually. than some of the drivers. Very genuine chap and a very popular driver.
The debate began whether the accident was the fault of the almost Formula One level of power that the current cars had, or whether it was just a rallying accident. Most felt the latter, but not many were confident about the safety of the sport. Through it all, Ari Vatanen appeared to be the Group B driver supreme, although after further wins on the Acropolis and New Zealand, Timo Salonen had taken over the leadership in the Drivers' Championship. But Ari's fight back here on the Monte Carlo remained the season's highlight so far. All the despondency felt after co-driver Terry Harriman's mistake dispelled with a quite exhilarating display of flat-out driving. All the more horrifying then when Ari himself was a victim of a violent accident in Argentina, the car cartwheeling at around 120 miles an hour. Terry Harriman was able to lift himself from the wreckage, but Vatanen was gravely injured with a crushed chest, broken leg and fractured vertebrae. His chances of survival looked remote.
If it wasn't for a helicopter, which arrived very soon and took me to the nearest hospital, I mean, because my internal bleeding was so severe, that could have been the end, or would have been. And then afterwards, in Finland, when I was operated in Finland, there were critical moments. It was a miracle that I survived, but I'm twice as happy to be here now.
For the next year, it wasn't only a physical but a psychological battle that Vatanen had to win to reclaim his rightful position at the top of the sport. But there was no doubting that the presence of Peugeot's team helicopter, which had been following the car on the stage, as it always does, was a key factor in his survival. In the mid-80s, it wasn't only the cars, but everything that surrounded them that turned the World Rally Championship into a great technological exercise. The ability to service and maintain cars swiftly in comparatively remote regions turned the leading teams into armies on the march. This is the kind of backup in terms of spares and support vehicles that kept the Audi World Championship effort on course. In Finland, on the Thousand Lakes Rally, Stig Blomqvist, second in the championship behind Salonen, had hopes of beating the Finns on their home ground. His Quattro spouting steam from the new water-cooled brakes that were having a tough job slowing the 1,200-kilogram car. Blomqvist was never able to get within striking distance of the eventual winner, the new world champion Timo Salonen, but he looked impressive nevertheless. Immense speeds right through the field on the switchback stages of Finland. This is Bjorn Valdegaard in the Toyota Celica GT, 7th here on the Thousand Lakes, but Valdegaard had a pretty good season with 2 second places that left him 7th overall in the World Championship. The new world champion, Timo Salonen, on his debut season for Peugeot. He won in Portugal, and then a run of 4 straight victories in mid-season gave him the title by a comfortable margin. Henri Toivonen had missed most of the season with a neck injury after a heavy accident. Here in Finland, he's heading for another one. A classic rally accident, steering hard over, wheels locked up and heading straight off. Just look at the effort it requires to get Toivonen and co-driver Juha Pyränen back on the stage. And bear in mind that at the end of all this, they still managed to finish 4th. The world champion followed this victory up with 2nd place behind Walter Röhrl in San Remo, and Peugeot then prepared themselves for the new crop of Group B cars on the Lombard RAC. And these included MG Metro 6R4s, 1 car for Tony Pond, the other for Malcolm Wilson.
We're going to get the cars in.
cars delivering 420 horsepower from engines bred for rallying. And the event would attract national interest as never before, as Pond took his car into third place, mixing it for Britain with the best opposition in the world. Also making its debut, the new four-wheel drive Lancia Delta S4, one each for Henri Toivonen and Marco Alén. It was the best entry of the season and produced a competition to really excite the biggest crowds for an international rally in Britain.
Turn right.
Hero's drive from Tony Pond into third position behind the two Lancias, who only really started to pull away when the forest tracks became frozen. The three Peugeots all went out. Toivonen never stopped attacking, never stopped taking risks. The second victory on the event for the Finn, who now seemed to have the sport at his feet. And no one was surprised when Toivonen started off the 1986 season with a victory on the Monte Carlo that matched the success of his father 20 years earlier. The manner of it was a little surprising, with Toivonen having a collision with a spectator's car when leaving a stage, and considerable effort was required by the Lancia mechanics to keep Toivonen's hopes alive. Peugeot and Austin Rover left Monaco rather demoralised. But back into the sport for the Swedish rally came Ford, back in the World Championship for the first time in 6 years, with their stunning new car, the Group B RS200. After a battle against the clock to produce the 200 required for qualification, the team had spent sleepless nights making sure they were ready for Sweden. The cars would be in the hands of Kalle Grundle and the acknowledged master of the Swedish rally, Stig Blomqvist. The team that took the manufacturer's title in 1979, in the days of the Escort, had produced a very different-looking car. But Peter Ashcroft, competitions manager in '79, aimed to be a winner once more.
It's not an evolution car like everybody else is running. It's our basic Group B car, which we've made 200 of. We're fairly confident. We've done quite a lot of testing, and as you know, we got the homologation finally sorted on the 30th of January, and that has meant a lot of work for the Borum mechanics in getting the vans ready, the service vehicles ready, and getting the cars ready. We got the cars over here on Sunday. We've done a little bit of testing just to make sure they were all right, and we've been setting up gearboxes and spares and things like that.
A British team, but no British driver. So why the decision to go with Grundle and Blomqvist?
We chose Stig. He was obviously a world champion and one of the best there is, and Kalle to support him as the number two. But above all, we want winners, and I think with Scandinavians, we've got that.
After the disappointment of Monte Carlo, this was an important test for the British manufacturers. In the opening stages, Stig Blomqvist showed early promise with the Ford, but early promise was all it became. Blomqvist was lying fourth after the opening series of stages, but early on the second day went out with a seized engine, leaving Ford hopes with Kalle Grundle. Juha Kankkunen had moved from Toyota to Peugeot in the close season. He'd opened with 5th place on the Monte Carlo and was going well here. Not quite as well as the early leader Salonen, who was no doubt stung by accusations that he hadn't been trying on the opening round. Austin Rover fielded Per Eklund with Malcolm Wilson, not an event they were overly optimistic about, and sure enough, it was to end in disappointment. Eklund went out after the first stage with engine problems, and now after 13 stages, it's Wilson in trouble as well, problems that would appear to be pretty fundamental. Frustration is starting to set in for Austin Rover, who, apart from the excitement of the RAC, are seeing little return on their investment of money, time and expertise. And now time is running out for Malcolm Wilson.
Come here, Malcolm. The bolts for the slave cylinder? Did you put them back in? We're going to have to go, lads. Yeah, all right, yeah. Can you go without the tunnel cover on?
Wilson's rally was over, but it will be a splendid result for Juha Kankkunen, his first World Championship victory in Europe and one that set him up for a serious challenge on the title. Although there would be stern opposition from Marco Alén, who came second, and indeed Henri Toivonen, who led at one point until turbo failure. And all was not total despondency for Ford, who saw Kalle Grundle drive steadily into third after the earlier failure of Per Eklund. But the winner in Sweden, Juha Kankkunen.
Monte Carlo, we were a little bit unlucky with the tires and then everything didn't went well, but now everything seems to be working, and Timo was incredible quick beginning, so I think in Portugal and when we get to gravel we have something to say also.
Portugal was certainly an eagerly awaited event, but no one could have fully appreciated the story that would unfold. We were set for the most intriguing round of the championship, but in front of the sport's most excitable crowd. And the scenes at the first stage at Sintra confirmed the driver's worst fears. The Lancia of Marco Alén powers through a human tunnel of spectators. In similar fashion, Walter Röhrl, wanting to drive on the limit, but one mistake in the Audi would have certainly spelt disaster for the crowd a few feet away. Stig Blomqvist in the Ford RS200, and it was a similar car of Portuguese champion Joaquim Santos that was involved in the tragedy a few minutes later. Santos had come over the brow of a hill to find the road blocked by excited spectators. He had nowhere to go except to plough into the crowd. The eventual toll was 4 dead, 31 injured. The reaction was horror and anger. Ford boss Peter Ashcroft had no hesitation but to pull out of the rally, here breaking the news to Kalle Grundle.
Withdraw, Carson. Yeah, we're pulling out. I think 2 people have been killed and a lot injured. And my instructions from head office at war, I'm very sorry for you both because
you don't like this rally. I have bad feelings during the whole recce for this rally.
You know, I'm really sorry for you and the rest of the boys, the team and Stig, because you've all worked so hard and it was going to be pretty good. But
no, I understand completely.
There's a mark of respect for people, and we've gone on record saying, you know, that we were concerned about crowd control. We said it in our press conferences, and I think we've got to pull out.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I understand.
What have you told your drivers?
I've said that we've got to withdraw from the event. They're going to the next time control to hand in their cards. And I'm going to see the organisers now and withdraw the entry as far as we're concerned. You know, we've said for a long time we're concerned about crowd control. We said it in our press conferences. And I'm afraid it's happened. You know, there's been a terrible accident, and as a mark of respect for the people that have been killed and injured, then I think we've got to pull out. It was an RS200, it was a Ford Motor Company entry, and we're very, very sad about it. It was nothing, I don't think, Santos couldn't do anything about it. He went over a brow, the car was more or less airborne, it landed on the road, and there was just people blocking the road, simple as that. And he reacted and turned the wheel, and the car went into a slide because it's very, very slippery out there. And he took about 20 or 30 people off. Now, exactly what the injuries and condition of that is, I don't know until we get an official answer from the organisers.
Sorry it happened to happen to you. It had to happen to somebody. I'm sorry.
Okay. No. That's right.
Tony, what's your opinion they should do?
Mate, we can't. I am not prepared to go on as a driver, irrespective. No way. Whatever.
What are you going to do then? You're going to tell the organisers?
Going into that control, and that's where I'm stopping. You know, I've got my own conscience. I'm not prepared to drive between people at 120 miles an hour. Just no way.
Was it worse than you ever remember when you were here before?
No, it's always been bad. You could have done the same damage with any car, but I mean, the cars are 400 horsepower plus, you know what I mean? And the margin of error, I mean, you make a tiny error, you're killing people. I mean, I can't see the logic of it.
Tony Pond determined to pull out. Malcolm Wilson in the other MG Metro 6R4 felt the same.
I mean, my car stepped out of line slightly, a full sort of four-wheel drift, and I mean, you know, the spectators must have been this far off the rear end of the car. I mean, they were just all moving back, the whole crowd was moving back, and I mean, the car's going towards them. I mean, another 5 miles an hour more, you know, and I would have been into them. I mean, it's crazy. And I mean, I don't want to continue because, I mean, well, to live with that for the rest of your life.
Marco Elen in the Lancia, another angry man.
You think the organisers will be forced to listen to you and cancel them?
I'm not going.
No, you're not going?
Okay.
Anyway.
Maybe. I am only Lancia, but anyway, I'm not going.
I think a lot of the drivers agree with you. They're not going to go.
I don't know, but I say absolutely no way. You know, that says you're having too small road here and too many spectators. That means, you know, in North you're having large road, but you're coming much more fast. But anyway, that's a night time, and we will see. But Sintra and these states, absolutely, I'm not going.
I sympathise with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The top teams all pulled out. The future of the Portuguese rally was in serious doubt, but most importantly, the crowd problems in the sport had to be tackled immediately. Then another tragic blow for world rallying. In Corsica, the death of Henri Toivonen with co-driver Sergio Cresto. The sport's most exciting driver perished instantly when his car flew off the road and exploded. The loss of Toivonen and Cresto would force the governing body to act not only on crowd control, but Group B as well.
It was really terrible news, you know, I have known Henry from when he was kid. So you know, 5 years old. You know, so it's very hard to believe it has happened. This time, I think he was the fastest driver around. You know, winning RAC Monte Carlo, and everything was just open for him, and you know, it's a really terrible thing.
It's been a sad start to the season all round with stories like
really
the debate is going on in the papers about exactly where the sport is going. What is your view about the power of the cars and the kind of events that we see them competing in?
Yeah, it's two problems. You know, the first one is the spectators, and we have been extremely lucky not to have any big problems and accidents before. They have been really, you know, on the cards all the time. And now it looks like we are getting nearly every rally something. And of course, then driver's point of view, cars are very, very fast now. And of course, your reaction time is much less what you used to have. And every bend is, you know, you have to brake and decide the speed. So it makes it much more difficult, you know. And if I think, you know, I have been driving maybe already 23 years, so we used to have a good races even 15 years ago.
What is the answer, though? Do you think there is a crisis facing the sport at the moment?
When rallying has become so important, like it is now, publicity and all the factories, of course, are trying to do their best. And when the factories are putting money and all the knowledge what they have got, it's just one way to go, and that's forward. And so you have to be very careful when you make the regulations, because normally people intend to go around those. So it has to be simple regulation how to reduce the speed.
FISA acted with speed and authority, declaring that the 1987 championship would be for Group A cars. The Group B supercars were effectively banned after 1986, but Audi made their own decision and decided to withdraw from the sport immediately. For Lancia, it was a task of rebuilding the season that had begun so well. In Argentina, they bounced back with a 1-2 result, Biasion and Allen. Cali Grundle was a recruit to the team for the Thousand Lakes. Team boss Cesare Fiorio knew that Lancia was still in range of Peugeot in the Constructors' Championship. Allen could still catch Kankkunen in the Drivers' Championship.
We had started this championship in a fantastic way by winning, well, before RAC last year, and then Monte Carlo, and doing very well in Sweden
in Safari and Portugal, but then unfortunately we had this bad accident in Corsica. And therefore our championship now is all uphill, always difficult to get, and we are trying to win this one to obtain the possibility to continue up in Sanremo and RAC.
There was still a Toivonen in the fray. Henry's brother Harry Toivonen joined the ranks of Austin Rover. Lancia against Peugeot against the 6R4. The last days of Group B were going to be quite a spectacle on the Thousand Lakes and San Remo. Still one more turbulent twist in this astonishing season. On the San Remo, the Peugeot trim included a skirt running the length of the car. Illegal, said the scrutineers, significantly Italian scrutineers. The 3 Peugeots were disqualified. The French cried fix, but the rally was now firmly in the control of the Italian Lancias.
The motorsport has rules, and these rules must be used and applied.
As far as Lancia is concerned, Alain still has a chance of winning the World Championship. Will you apply team orders to allow Alain to win tonight?
We haven't yet had a meeting with the drivers because this decision has just arrived, and we shall have a meeting later on and we shall decide what to do. It's very difficult to say to a driver who is in front, maybe it's not him who must win. We shall think.
So no team orders, or at least no team orders pending a team meeting. It was quite clear what happened in that meeting. Lancia had to get Alain up from 3rd, where he'd suffered a couple of punctures, into the lead. And this is how they did it, at the penultimate special stage in the mountains the following morning. Mickey Biasion parks the leading Lancia. Behind him, Dario Cerato in 2nd place, and he's about to give way to Marco Alain. It's not quite the exhilarating contest in the hills that the Italian fans were looking forward to. Instead, the less than exhilarating sight of team orders being applied. Marco Alain is making up 4 minutes to win the San Remo and improve his hopes of the World Championship. And just to remind you that this is a special stage, Malcolm Wilson blasts through on his way to a splendid 4th place. Mickey Biasion, at least the moral victor of the 1986 San Remo. Even so, Alain still trailed Kankkunen by 2 points coming into the RAC, which this year was the penultimate round. Kankkunen, the star of the season, in earnest discussion with Cesare Fiorio, helping to confirm that Kankkunen would be a Lancia driver for 1987. After what happened at San Remo, pre-rally scrutineering was rather tense, but this time the Peugeot skirts were past legal.
What I do conclude is that we can do motorsport with a French team in England easier than with a French team in Italy. Now we'll ask to have the classification of the rally change because we feel that if we are right on the National Court of Appeal, something has to be done against the classification.
So maybe the World Championship wasn't as clear-cut as we imagined, but on the RAC there was a very clear-cut performance from Timo Salonen, his 2nd win of the season. Kankkunen, with such a narrow World Championship lead, was ragged, and so was his car. He'd led the rally on 2 occasions, but made mistakes each time. This, the most eye-catching.
It was slippy corner and we didn't have much speed, but but it was so slippery and we started spinning and spin backwards and the ditch was so deep that it rolled backwards and that was it. My own mistake, nothing else.
And that allowed Marco Alén, whose Lancia was also looking a little dog-eared, to get into second place ahead of Kankkunen. This was where the main interest of the rally was, and Alén hung on to second, which meant that he now moved to the top of the championship standings by 1 point from Kankkunen. It all suggested quite a showdown on the final event of the championship, the Olympus Rally in North America, but it also all depended on appeals and whether the result of San Remo was allowed to stand. On the Olympus, it was Alén virtually all the way. Kankkunen incurred road penalties early on, and Alén was never really challenged from then on. It seemed that Kankkunen was relaxing in second place and waiting for FISA to decide who would be world champion. But the result at least meant that Alén was world champion-elect, and for a man who'd been trying so long to claim the sport's top prize, there was an emotional, very Italian celebration at the Lancia service area.
Grazie.
11 days later, the celebration stopped. FISA cancelled the results of the San Remo, Marco Alén lost 20 points, and Juha Kankkunen became world champion. And that was Group B on the World Championship. On the British Championship, the supercars have been spectacular, even though FISA demanded shorter events. The tarmac of the Isle of Man was the final flourish for the fully fledged Group B cars in the British Isles. Mark Lovell won the title through his sheer consistency. This is one of his rare inconsistent moments that nearly cost him valuable points on the Scottish Rally. Another amateur cameraman captured David Llewellyn, one of his rather frequent mishaps. Llewellyn, despite moments like this, was the great prospect of the British sport, but a works drive with Austin Rover was lost to him with the disappearance of Group B. Llewellyn looks back on it all, though, with some affection.
It was very exciting times. The cars were very exciting. They were perhaps going a bit too quick, to be honest. I think the shame is the Metro was basically a safe car. It wasn't turbocharged. And the bulk of the car was steel, where a lot of the others had turbochargers, and the engine compartment and the oil tank and the fuel tanks were all very close to that in the back of the car, mid-engine. So it was a shame. The Metro was probably the safest of all of them, as I proved on the Welsh in '86, giving it a fair old roll down the hillside. So it was a shame to see that car go, but there we are. I think something needed to be done. Sadly, you know, Group B was banned. And my career did take not a backward step, but it certainly levelled out and didn't progress then for a couple of years because I was thrown back, like everybody, into Group A cars. And, of course, getting a contract like that doesn't come very easily.
Rallying was changing and the sport was evolving. Paris-Dakar was the flagship event of the new-style rally raids. Winner here in 1987 was Ari Vatanen, confirming a full recovery from his terrible injuries by winning an event which put the emphasis not only on courage, but also on navigation.
Some places, the references are very vague or you don't see them at all, and then you just have to use your common sense and not to panic. I mean, it's very disturbing when you have come to a decision that, okay, we have to go a little bit more to the west, for example, we have been too much east now recently, and then you see a car in front of you which turns completely east, for example, and then you have just made up your own mind that you should go west and he goes east, and that happens very often, and it really can shatter your confidence there. At least in the beginning of the event, when we were lost only for 10 minutes at a time, I mean, I got very angry with Bernard. I said, you know, you don't know what you are doing. I mean, you should know, and haven't you been here before, and sort of things. And because it was new, I mean, getting lost in a rally, it was, apart from getting lost in the middle of Birmingham in a RAC rally, I mean, it's new to me. And when you are lost, you don't know for how long you are going to be lost. You think you can be lost for hours, and everybody is going to pass you. And usually afterwards you always find out that, okay, it's the same place where everybody gets lost. But there was one place in Mauritania where the entire field was lost for a few hours. There were dunes, and it was like the sea of dunes. I mean, it was just endless. And from the helicopter, they say, or from the aeroplane, it was very easy to see the way. But in a way, when you are down there, I mean, it's like being in a labyrinth. You don't see the way out. And you try to go one way, you go past those dunes, you zigzag, and you come to a cul-de-sac. And you have to turn around and try another way. You come to another cul-de-sac. And at that time, there are cars going everywhere, and you are not sure about your basic directions anymore. And it's very confusing, and it's just and you panic. You think, well, I'm going to stay here, you know, I mean, I can't find a place out. But somehow, you always find a way out, and but we all lost in that one place quite a few hours.
But Vatanen had certainly found a new direction, and so too had Peugeot, and Vatanen would continue to be successful on the Paris-Dakar. Others were taking to the desert in more conventional rally championships, and competition in the Middle East was providing opportunities for eye-catching cars unable to make an impact at World Championship level. The Porsche 911 was one such, campaigned here by Saeed Al-Hajri, claiming victory on the Pharaohs Rally in the shadow of the pyramids. But across Europe, others were preparing themselves for a new-look World Championship with a traditional starting point. Monte Carlo was round one of the 1987 championship under Group A rules, a 300 horsepower limit, so performance and spectacle would be down, but one benefit was that a wide range of manufacturers and cars had been attracted to the competition. That didn't much change the balance of power, though, and Lancia showed themselves to be best prepared with a four-wheel drive Delta HF, with which Kankkunen was to retain the title. There was the Renault 11 Turbo for Jean Regnotti, attracting enthusiastic home support. From Ford, the four-wheel drive Sierra Cosworth, Blomqvist at the wheel, and the Volkswagen GTI, driven into sixth place on the Monte Carlo by Kenneth Eriksson. The 323 Mazda Turbo gave Timo Salonen victory in Sweden, but failed in Portugal, where Lancia continued to exert their stranglehold on the season. Elsewhere, there were different cars for different requirements. On the Safari, Bjorn Valdegaard and Lars-Erik Torff campaigned the Toyota Supra, Torff finishing third. The four-wheel drive Subaru Turbo was in the hands of Per Eklund, and also Ari Vatanen making his return to the World Championship scene. A Nissan 200SX for local star Mike Kirkland. But the rally was headed by Audi, coming back to the championship with the return of Group A, taking first and second via Mikkola and Rall, and becoming the first manufacturer to win the Safari with a four-wheel drive car, the Audi 200 Quattro. More and more teams and manufacturers were doing their groundwork on the racetrack as much as the rally stage. Touring car championships like the one in Britain hastened the development of the Ford Sierra Cosworth, and also persuaded BMW to become at least distantly involved in rallying, now that with the M3 they had a car which could be a real force on the tarmac events. They proved their worth in Corsica, privately entered cars prepared by ProDrive. This is Marc Duez, and this is Bernard Beguin, who won the event ahead of the Lancias of Yves Loubet and Mickey Biasion. Jimmy McRae had a Ford Sierra Cosworth for San Remo and gave us a driver's eye view of Group A tarmac rallying. Ian Grindrod on the pace notes.
And easy right, 50. Easy left and sign and open hairpin right. 50. Flat right. into easy left, long.
On the British Championship, the FISA rules allowed Group B rallying to remain alive for the time being, and that meant a stay of execution for the Opel Manta under the two-wheel drive up to 3-litre rule. Pentti Riikola, the British-based Finn, won in Yorkshire, but the end for the Manta wasn't far off.
Flat right, 100. Flat left over crest, 500. Brock's out.
That explosion for Russell Brooks and Mike Broad on the Ulster Rally spelt the end for a much-loved car in major competition.
See if we can pull it in on the left. That is the end of our rally. Goodbye.
Nearly the end of Marco Ellen's rally. This moment on one of the spectator stages of the RAC Rally. Lancia had dominated the season, winning 7 of the rounds. Allen and Kankkunen came to the RAC tied on 80 points, 14 behind Biasion, who wasn't contesting the event. Despite Lancia's domination, it was a season of ill feeling among the drivers, beset as they were by team orders. But no team orders for the RAC, and Kankkunen, who had made up his mind to return to Toyota for 1988, won the event and became the first man to retain the world title. Mickey Biasion, runner-up in the World Championship, was the man who'd impressed the most, though, and he was just one of a whole new generation of drivers who were emerging to make their own mark on World Championship rallying. Carlos Sainz, a rallying hero for Spain and definite World Championship potential. Kenneth Eriksson had been splendidly entertaining and had won the Ivory Coast Rally. A new generation of rally stars, proving that the sport was successfully coming through its season of transition. Bruno Sabi, committed and competitive and proving a very popular winner of the opening 1988 round in Monte Carlo. Mikael Eriksson, however, was less convincing on the Swedish rally, but Lancia came away with 2 things to celebrate. Victory on the event for Marco Allen and the prospect of the new Lancia Delta Integrale for Portugal.
On the asphalt, the car was not very competitive compared to the Sierra Cosworth or the BMW M3. And now with the Integrale we have much bigger wheels and we also have more power. And so we hope that to compensate a little this handicap that we had on this particular situation. On gravel, already the Delta 4-wheel drive was quite quick, so maybe it's a smaller improvement, but the biggest improvement is on asphalt.
And the Integrale turned out to be very impressive on asphalt. Mickey Biasion giving the car a debut victory in Portugal as Lancia filled 6 of the top 10 places. Ford beat Lancia in Corsica, but by the Acropolis Rally, Toyota was starting to suggest that they had a car that could live with the pace of the Lancias, even if they were struggling to match the durability. And in Juha Kankkunen, they certainly had a driver who could live with the best. They weren't able to prevent Mickey Biasion becoming the first Italian to win the title, though, or Marco Allen winning his 18th World Championship event in what was an epic 1,000 Lakes. But they proved that the immediate future might not be all Lancia. This heightened sense of competition was also lifting the speed and spectacle of World Championship rallying, and it was once again heightening the danger as well. On the Monte Carlo Rally of 1989, spectator control was chaotic. Alex Fiorio ploughed off a snowbank into the crowd and 2 spectators were injured. It seemed that the sport was back to the bad old days of 2 years ago in this respect, and it was hard on a young driver who was struggling to get to grips with the automatic clutch on the Integrale. Later in the event, though, Fiorio was involved in a more tragic and freakish accident. When his car left the road with a punctured left front tyre, just down the bank were Lars-Erik Torff and his former co-driver Bertil Rennfeldt, and both were killed, the kind of incident that will always be a hazard of the sport. Torff was a distinguished driver with a fine record on the African events, and his 3rd place on the Swedish rally the year before showed what he might have been capable of in years to come. The opening exchanges of the season. Biasion won the Monte Carlo and won also in Portugal, East Africa and Greece. Didier Auriol won in Corsica, and Lancia were in charge again. The challenge of Toyota having failed to materialise. After Greece, Biasion on the left had a 30-point lead in the championship, and Toyota, despite Kankkunen and Carlos Sainz, were over 60 points adrift in the Constructors' Championship. The Acropolis Rally had seemed suited to Toyota, with all their experience and success on the Safari, but the cars didn't appear strong enough, or when the opportunity arose, quick enough. All 4 entries retired. Mazda had started the season well with victory in Sweden, which was being run as the opening round. Ingvar Carlsson achieving a World Championship victory at the age of 41, but without any significant opposition from Lancia. Timo Salonen seemed to have the rally won when he crashed into a snowbank. These had been lean years for the former champion, struggling to make an impression with Mazda after his good years with Peugeot. But the Thousand Lakes Rally would provide a highlight, where Timo was joined in weighing up the problems of the Mazda by Hannu Mikkola.
Problem is the engine size. You know, we haven't got the same power than them, but certainly handling is same class than their car.
Also in Finland, Ari Vatanen with the Mitsubishi Galant. 4-wheel steering on the Galant. Vatanen perhaps exaggerating the heaviness of it when he gave the car its debut on the previous year's RAC. But on the Super Special of the 1989 Acropolis, Vatanen was joint fastest, so a 4-wheel steering car had at least led a World Championship rally. And there'd be another Galant for Michael Eriksson on the Thousand Lakes.
I'm very hopeful for this rally. I have a good feeling for the new Mitsubishi, and well, I can't tell you so much more.
Its handle is very predictable. Because it's big and slightly heavy, but the good side of that is that it's very stable and doesn't make any nasty moves suddenly.
And what an event the Thousand Lakes turned out to be. Right on the pace were Mitsubishi, Mazda and Toyota, and though they were quick, the Lancias were getting beaten. In a great battle, there was the unprecedented sight of Carlos Sainz leading the Thousand Lakes, a Spaniard winning in Finland. But as you can see, it all became a little too much for the man from Madrid.
I missed the bend too fast.
And it was all too much for Lancia as well. Didier Auriol went out with accident damage, Marco Irlen went out with a blown head gasket, and even the world champion Miki Biasion wasn't in the mood for things and never came to terms with the particular demands of the Finnish forests. Which left the unlikely combination of Mitsubishi and Mazda. Vatanen had disappeared with a blown engine after 20 stages, so it was Michael Eriksson, on loan from Lancia, who took the victory. Eriksson ahead of Timo Salonen in the Mazda, the former world champion with his best result of the season. On the San Remo, Lancia hit back with their latest progression, the 16-valve Integrale, and in the hands of Didier Auriol, it made quite an impression. Auriol and co-driver Bernard Ocelli surprisingly unscathed. But proof that the sport was once again up to Group B speed and performance, and this was a Group B kind of accident, thankfully without the sad consequences of previous years. Auriol had been leading the event at the time. Clearly there's been an advance in roll cage protection for the crew, and it was much needed. All it took was a deceptive bump to throw the car offline, and the driver loses all control. Auriol emerged from it a shaken but wiser man.
Yeah, I arrive flat, I remove and no, it's not a crash. But okay, it's mistake, yeah. But never I have think that I can do that here because on practice it's all right. And it's all right.
Up ahead in the rally, better things for Lancia as a storming drive from Miki Biasion makes his World Championship title safe. With the job done for both constructors and drivers, Lancia declined to contest the last World Championship rally of the decade, the 1989 RAC. So Toyota were the favourites, and each of their 4 cars led at one time. But just like on the Thousand Lakes, Mitsubishi were putting up stern opposition. Ari Vatanen in one car, Pentti Riikola in the other. Ari Vatanen dropped out of contention with a roll in Grisdale. The British driver David Llewellyn was the first to lead for Toyota, the first time there'd been a Briton in front for 8 years. He remained a name to watch in the 90s. There were others who were nearing the end of their careers, Jimmy McRae there, and his old rival Russell Brooks. Malcolm Wilson has always been among the fastest and most talented of the domestic drivers and proved it on the RAC with a 10th place finish, the top British driver. In the 80s, Ari Vatanen has had to recover from worse dents and greater setbacks than this, hence the amusement of Timo Salonen.
Ask what happened, how car is so bad looking.
It's like your car normally, Timo.
No, I never see so bad car.
I just got the corner, Timo. I should not cut the corners. I learned it from you. And there was a tree stump in the grass and that's it.
I think so. Back to driving school, I think so.
Seriously, Ari, what happened this morning?
No, exactly. I just got the corner on the first Grisdale. Not much, but there was a tree stump in the grass and it just launched it over immediately. Front wheel was bent, but that's all. It's all. They're all aligned now.
Vatanen bowing out of the 80s in style, but his teammate was going to have his greatest success with this final fling of the decade. Pentti Riikola, 44 years old, contested his first RAC 16 years earlier. Now living in Britain and almost an adopted British driver, he was going to provide the big crowds on the final day with the closest they'd get to a British success. Carlos Sainz led into the final series of stages by barely 30 seconds. In theory, he could hold a Riikola off, but a broken prop shaft put paid to his dreams of success on the RAC. So a World Championship victory at last for the man who'd been trying for 17 years. A Riikola had begun with a Ford Escort in World Championship events. The supercars had come and gone, Group B had come and gone, and now he'd made it. And the venue for the first low-key celebration was a motorway service area just off the M1. And across the car park, Toyota and Carlos Sainz were trying to come to terms with yet another big disappointment.
We were trying maximum, absolutely.
Which is all you could ask. Carlos Sainz allowed himself a glance across the car park to the final winners of the decade. Ronan McNamee, Pentti Riikola and the Mitsubishi Galant, a car that lived up to expectations.
Fantastic all the way through, and it's just an incredible enjoyment when you drive a car which does what you want to do it, and it's an unbelievable feeling.
And Ronan McNamee.
And that is World Championship rallying in the 80s. It was high speed, high tech, but always with room for the human touch.